All right, welcome to the Restoration Church of Christ Bible Study. We meet every Wednesday night at 5 p.m. to study the Lord's Word. Tonight we're studying Exodus chapter 9. So if you've been attending, we've gone through the book of Exodus, we've gone through the book of Genesis. Before that, we did Revelation, we did Esther. We did study the book of Matthew, though that was not live streamed at that time. So I'm thinking after Exodus, we'll probably go through another one of the Gospels, perhaps John. But tonight is Exodus chapter 9. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. I'll try and answer any questions that I can. And if not, we'll just jump straight into the text. So, all right, Exodus chapter 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh and tell him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and hold them still, behold, the Lord's hand is on your livestock which are in the field, and on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the herds, and on the flocks, with a grievous pestilence. The Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, and nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel.'" Now, it's interesting that we get to this plague, and finally there's a distinction between the people of Israel and the people of Egypt. It doesn't tell us with every plague who exactly suffered. Usually it tells us all the land of Egypt, right? But here it's clear that it makes a distinction between Israel and Egypt. And if I were to ask you, what's the biggest difference between Jews and Christians? We read from the same book after all. What's the biggest difference between Jews, Christians, and Muslims? Maybe the books we read. But if you're sitting at the table with a bunch of us, it's going to be the things that we eat. And this is certainly true in the book of Exodus. Remember that when the people of Israel went into the land of Egypt, they were shepherds. And Genesis tells us that shepherds were abominable to the people of Egypt. In other words, they didn't like shepherds. And so the distinction between Israelites and Egyptians, as far as the Egyptians are concerned, is that Israelites are shepherds. They are people who raise different livestock. They're people who are nomadic. They're people who can be distinguished by what they eat. And so here, even before we have the dietary restrictions that come in the book of Leviticus, there's a distinction between the people of Israel and the people of Egypt based on what they eat. This comes from God, and it will continue to come from God. But I also want to point out that these laws, we always take them as laws, right? They only apply to the people of Israel. In other words, all those dietary laws were never universal. They only ever applied to the people of Israel to set them apart as a nation from their neighbors, so that by their culture you could tell who they are. All right, verse 4, the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, and nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel. The Lord appointed a set time, saying, "Tomorrow the Lord shall do this thing in the land." The Lord did that thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. Pharaoh sent, and behold, there was not so much as one of the livestock of the Israelites dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was stubborn, and he didn't let the people go. The Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, "Take handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it towards the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become small dust over all the land of Egypt, and shall be boils and blisters breaking out on man and on animal throughout all the land of Egypt." They took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it up towards the sky, and it became boils and blisters breaking out on man and on animal. The magicians couldn't stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. Now, keep in mind this whole thing, the plagues of Egypt have been a contest between magicians, between Moses, the Lord's magician, and between Pharaoh's magicians. And a while back in the last Bible study, we saw Moses finally get the upper hand on Pharaoh's magicians. He finally produced a miracle that they could not replicate. The miracle of him striking the earth and the dust of the earth becoming a swarm of gnats. Well, this is also something that they can't replicate and probably wouldn't if they wanted to, because it is such an awful thing. It makes me think, though, the ashes of the furnace. Now, if you mix ashes with water, you get soap, you get lye, all right? And if you get lye on your skin, it will quite literally dissolve your skin. All you need is water and ashes. So this seems to correspond to some kind of volcanic eruption, right? I mean, that seems like a pretty naturalistic way of explaining this. But as far as we know, there was no volcanic eruption at this time. Say circa 2000 to 1000 BC. So, as far as we know, there was no volcanic eruption, but the boils would be explainable that way. The boils could also be explainable if there's some kind of bacteria being spread about, right? Staph infections that sit on the skin can cause boils. And so there's all sorts of naturalistic ways we can explain this miracle, but keep in mind, a naturalistic explanation doesn't do it justice, because if it did, the magicians would have been able to repeat it. And it says here, the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he didn't listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and tell him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues against your heart, against your officials, and against your people, that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For now I would have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this cause I have made you stand, to show you my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Because you still exalt yourself against my people, that you won't let them go. Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as has not been in Egypt since the day it was founded, even until now. Now therefore command that all your livestock and all that you have in the field be brought into shelter. The hail will come down on every man and animal that is found in the field and isn't brought home, and they will die. Now think about it. Wasn't one of the plagues that God killed all the livestock? Well, clearly not all of the livestock. Keep in mind, the Bible doesn't speak completely literally all of the time, especially when we're talking in the realm of miracles and, especially when we're talking in the realm of miracles or prophecies. Quite often it's symbolic or it's approximate. Here, most of the animals died. Well, now what's left in the field is going to die too. Those who feared the Lord's word among the servants of Pharaoh made their servants and their livestock flee into their houses. Whoever didn't respect the Lord's word left his servants and his livestock in the field. So some of the Egyptians now are starting to fear the Lord. In other words, they are listening to the Lord's word and they are putting it to practice. Because the Lord has sent these plagues, they are now turning to God. Just as God said he wanted them to do. So the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, on man and on animal, and on every herb of the field throughout the land of Egypt." Moses stretched out his rod towards the heavens, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the earth. The Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. So there was very severe hail and lightning mixed with the hail, such as had not been on all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Now, the last translation that I read earlier today said that it was hail mixed with fire. And that's more consistent with the symbology of Exodus, right? We see later on that God leads the Israelites by a pillar of fire by night. But here in the World English Bible, it's saying that it is thunder and hail, right? Or thunder and hail mixed with lightning. And it's probably because the text is somewhat ambiguous. And if you're thinking about hail as, chunks of ice falling from the sky, then fire mixed with hail doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But keep in mind that in Genesis, God destroyed a whole city with fire and hail. And what we know about that, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is it actually corresponds with a meteor strike. So a meteor came and struck the French Alps and sent debris so far up. No, I'm sorry, it's the Swiss Alps, and sent debris far up into the atmosphere. And those shards of the Swiss Alps rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah in the Middle East. And we know this because of the archaeology, because of the geology, and because there's now a city built in the Swiss Alps inside the crater where the meteorite struck. So the crater is still there. The rocks from the Swiss Alps are in the Middle East. And where they struck, there are mass graves where once stood the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so it may be that the Lord is sending hail in a very similar way, that this hail corresponds with meteorites striking the land of Egypt and resulting in a description of hail and fire destroying the land. And honestly, if rocks and fire are striking your fields, they're going to be utterly destroyed, not just for that year, but when you salt the field with rocks, they have to dig those out in order to plow. So it's going to take time for these farms to recover when they receive this hail of meteorites from the sky. Now, do I know for certain that that's what happened? Absolutely not. I'm throwing things out here. Once again, these are naturalistic explanations of miracles, things that should not be taken naturalistically. The hail struck throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and animal, and the hail struck every herb of the field and broke every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail. Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said to them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked. Pray to the Lord, for there has been enough of mighty thunderings and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. Moses said to him, As soon as I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands to the Lord. The thunders shall cease, and there will not be any more hail, that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you don't yet fear the Lord God. The flax and the barley were struck, for the barley had ripened and the flax was blooming. But the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they had not grown up. So this tells us about what time of year it is. In fact, it's about the same time of year as Easter, or in this case, Passover. It tells us because we know that the barley harvest is upon them. Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh and spread out his hands to the Lord, and the thunders and hail ceased, and the rain was not poured on the earth. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders had ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his heart, he and his servants. The heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he didn't let the children of Israel go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. Now, I want you to note that here in chapter 9, it says that Pharaoh hardens his heart, and his servants harden their hearts. Why? Well, they're the ones that left their animals and their farm workers out in the fields. They're the ones that said, no, you can't go home. And they died because of it. Before it was just Pharaoh. And we are used to the idea that politicians, that monarchs, they don't really care about the lives of their people. But now Pharaoh's servants are hardening their own hearts because they are directly responsible for the deaths of others. And this is what's causing them to harden their hearts against the Lord. This is a very relatable situation. You might think, what if I were driving and struck someone? Would my heart be hardened against them? Would I hit and run, as so many people do? That's what this is. That is what it means for their heart to be hardened. It means that they're not doing the right thing. They're not able to do the right thing because they can think only of themselves and the burden that it would cause them if they did do the right thing. So Pharaoh and his servants now are counting the cost, and chapter 9 tells us that they themselves harden their hearts. Chapter 10, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants." Now, wait a minute. Just now in chapter 9, it said that Pharaoh and his servants hardened their hearts. Now in chapter 10, it says that God hardened their hearts. Which is it? Now, we could go into documentary hypothesis and how there's actually two sets of stories being told here. But I think it's a little more basic than that. I think it's that God gives the suggestion, but the choice is Pharaoh's. I think that it's as simple as God sets that angel and that devil on his shoulder, but the choice is still Pharaoh's. Pharaoh has free will to choose whether or not his heart will be hardened, whether or not he will do the right thing, or whether he will continue to say, "This is not my fault. I couldn't have done anything. I couldn't have helped. How could I have known?" Pharaoh's heart is going to continue to be hard. But God is the one that plants the seed. It's kind of like the Greek idea of the muses. The muses give the inspiration, but the artist is the one that brings it to life. In this case, not in a good way. And he says that I may show these my signs amongst them. Keep in mind, the point of God showing the signs is so that he may be glorified, so that the Egyptians may know that he is God and not any other. If the Egyptians turn from their gods towards the God of Israel, then he doesn't have to do anything else. He doesn't force Pharaoh to do anything. But he puts the idea in Pharaoh's mind so that Pharaoh may turn towards God. Pharaoh has decided that he won't. And that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son what things I have done to Egypt, and my signs which I have done amongst them, that you may know that I am the Lord. See, the Lord has two sets of plans here. If Pharaoh turns away from his wicked ways and turns towards the Lord, then the land of Egypt will see no more hardship. But if Pharaoh continues in his wicked ways, then God is providing proof that he is God. And he is providing it for the people of Israel who already honor him. Verse 3, Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may serve me. Or else if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country, and they shall cover the surface of the earth, so that one won't be able to see the earth. They shall eat the residue of that which has escaped, which remains to you from the hail, and shall eat every tree which grows for you out of the field. Your houses shall be filled, and the houses of all your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, as neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen since the day that they were on the earth to this day." He turned and went out from Pharaoh. Pharaoh's servants said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the men go that they may serve the Lord their God. Don't you know that Egypt is destroyed?" Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve the Lord your God." "But who are those who will go?" Moses said, "We will go with our young and with our old. We will go with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our herds, for we must hold a feast to the Lord." He said to them, "The Lord be with you if I let you go with your little ones. See evil is clearly before your faces. In other words, he says, you're a dirty, rotten liar, Moses. You're not going to come back if I let you and everyone go. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord, for that is what you desire. In other words, you don't really care about your wives. You don't really care about your kids. You don't care if they get to have the day off. You just want it for yourselves. So you yourselves go and have it, whatever. Then they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. The Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come up on the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail has left. Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. The locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and rested in all the borders of Egypt. They were very grievous. Before them there were no such locusts as they, nor will there ever be again, for they covered the surface of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened. And they ate every herb of the land, and all the fruit of the trees, which the hail had left. There remained nothing green, neither tree or herb of the field, through all the land of Egypt. So you may be wondering, is this possible? Once again, there is a naturalistic explanation for this. We see that there's definitely something weird going on with the weather, right? But there's also something weird going on with the locusts. The locusts are covering all of the land. And you may not be aware of this, but locusts aren't one single species of insect. They're a bunch of different species. And they're all very similar. And they have a really weird life cycle. Locusts spend most of their lives, they live for many years, and they spend most of it underground. But when they're mature and the locust breeding season is upon them, that year they leave the ground and they swarm. And they go and eat everything they can, and they breed, and then they die. But they do it on prime numbered years. So you know your prime numbers, right? You know a little bit about multiplication and your prime numbers. They're numbers that can't be divided evenly. For example, 4 isn't a prime number because 2 times 2 equals 4. You can divide it equally. Well, prime numbers are numbers like 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23. These are the numbers of years after which locusts will breed. And I think the lowest number for a species of locust is either 5 or 7 years. And the highest number is 17. Now, I could be wrong about that, but the thing is, they do this so that no two species of locusts will be breeding at the same time. They, in other words, come out of their burrows in different years. So one species will be out 1 year, another species will be out a different year. And if you're tracking what species is out, you can predict when they'll be out. But the catch is that while the locusts will not be out at the same time any year in their cycle, except a number of years equal to the cycles multiplied together. So for example, if one species comes out every 7 years and another species comes out every 11 years, then every 77 years, both species will be active. And that means their mating season is at the same time, and they're eating the crops every 77 years at the same time. But what if we wanted for 3 of them, right? Well, if the third one has an interval, a breeding interval of 11 years, has to be a different number. So let's say 13 years. Now it's whatever 77 times 13 is. And I didn't think to have my calculator out, even though I knew I would need it. So let's say 77 times 13, that's every 1001 years. But there might be another one that breeds every 15 years. Well, that means that we have 4 species of locusts, right? And we're never going to see all 4 of them at the same time, except for every 15,015 years. What about 5 species of locusts? Well, as you can see, the numbers get absurd fairly quickly. And there's a lot of different species of locusts, and they have different breeding intervals. So there is a naturalistic explanation for this. Yes, it is possible that even with just 4 species of locusts, it could be the worst that we'd see in 1,000 years. And with 5 species, it would be the worst that humanity has ever seen in all of written history to this day. And yes, they would cover the whole surface of the land of Egypt. How likely is it to happen? Not very. But that's what makes it a miracle. It's not very likely to ever happen. But it is something that will happen. In fact, predictably, every 15,000 years. If we knew when it had happened before, we would know when it would happen again. All right, then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste, and he said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore, please forgive my sin again and pray to the Lord your God that he also take away from me this death. Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. The Lord sent an exceedingly strong west wind, which took up the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the borders of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he didn't let the children of Israel go. The Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hands towards the sky, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. Ooh, darkness so thick you can feel it. Moses stretched out his hand towards the sky, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They didn't see one another, and nobody rose from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. So no one in Egypt has any light, but over in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites are, they do. It's interesting. It's like when you see the edge of the rain, right? When you're walking in the rain or you're driving in the rain and suddenly it just stops. Maybe there's even like you can see the sunlight start and the shade end. It's kind of like that, isn't it? So there's an image in nature that we can definitely visualize what this is like. And I don't know, maybe you have too, where you've been out in the dark and it's dark that's so oppressive, so just utterly dark and black that you can feel the darkness. You know, that is a natural thing as well. Verse 24, Pharaoh called to Moses and said, oh, and this is for 3 days. The sun doesn't rise for 3 days. Pharaoh called to Moses and said, "Go serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds stay behind." I wonder if when Moses enters the presence of Pharaoh, Moses is the only thing that Pharaoh can see because it's so dark. Or perhaps the darkness is lifted and then Pharaoh calls for Moses. He says, "Go serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds stay behind. Let your little ones also go with you." Moses said, "You must also give into our hand sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for of it we must take to serve the Lord our God. And we don't know with what we must serve the Lord until we come there." In other words, Pharaoh, you're going to let our livestock go with us, and you're going to send a sacrifice of your own to go with us. Moses is starting to ask for more. He wasn't before, right? He was asking for the same thing again and again, but now he's starting to ask for a little bit more because Pharaoh is just that little bit more desperate. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he wouldn't let them go. Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Be careful to see my face no more, for in the day you see my face, you shall die." Moses said, "You have spoken well. I will see your face again no more." Chapter 11. The Lord said to Moses, "I will bring yet one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go. When he lets you go, he will surely thrust you out altogether. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man ask of his neighbor, and every woman of her neighbor, jewels of silver and jewels of gold." The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. In other words, the people are turning against Pharaoh now. Moses said, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go out into the middle of Egypt, and all of the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. There will be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been, nor will be any more. But against any of the children of Israel, a dog won't even bark or move its tongue against man or animal, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between the Egyptians and Israel. All these servants of yours will come down to me and bow down themselves to me, saying, 'Get out with all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out.' He went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. The Lord said to Moses, 'Pharaoh won't listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt.' Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he didn't let the children of Israel go out of his land. Now, I'm wondering, chapter 12 is quite a long chapter. So I'm thinking, even though it's a little early, we should probably stop here. Because next is the plague of the firstborn, and it really deserves its own study, and not just the last few minutes of this Bible study. But before we go, does anyone have any questions? You can type any questions that you have into the chat. This is a story that I find quite disturbing to read. So I don't think that we'll have to age restrict it for the next one, but I will say that it is a very disturbing story to read. Once again, I'll remind you, this is the Restoration Church of Christ Bible Study. We meet every Wednesday night at 5 o'clock California time to study God's Word. We've been working our way through the book of Exodus. Before this was Genesis and the book of Esther. We've gone through Revelation as well. And before we started live streaming, we studied the book of Matthew. And after this, we'll probably study the Gospel of John. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And if you have questions throughout the week, you can always email me. My contact information is found on the church website, which is at www.restorationcoc.org or www.churchofchrist.gay. Until next week, God bless you. Go with God.